My name is Charmaine. I am 35 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward, smirking. You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way. I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue at my mother Elaine's insistence, despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary in prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A grades, joined honor societies, and dedicated every single free moment to mastering computer programming, just to create a world where I finally had some control. But nothing my mother said at that brunch could ever compare to the ultimate betrayal I experienced just days prior. The painful brunch with my mother was just a minor annoyance compared to the absolute devastation my husband brought upon me in what was supposed to be my most vulnerable hour. Let me take you back to the sterile, cold walls of Atlanta General Hospital, where my entire reality shattered into a million pieces. I was lying in a stark, white recovery room. The steady, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor next to my bed was the only sound cutting through the heavy, suffocating silence. I was still completely numb from the chest down after undergoing a traumatic emergency C-section. My pregnancy had been complicated by severe preeclampsia, and my blood pressure had spiked to dangerous life-threatening levels, forcing the doctors to deliver my twins weeks before their due date. My body was entirely exhausted. Every breath I took felt like a monumental effort, and the surgical incision burned with a dull, agonizing ache that medicine could not touch. Despite the intense physical agony, my arms were wrapped protectively around my two tiny, fragile babies. They were so small and they needed to be transferred to the neonatal intensive care unit soon, but for those brief, precious moments, the nurses allowed me to hold them against my chest. I stroked their soft heads and whispered promises to them. I promised my son and my daughter that they would always be fiercely loved, and that I would protect them with my life. I was desperately waiting for Jamal. I needed my husband. I needed the father of my children to walk through that heavy hospital door and tell me everything was going to be all right. I needed him to hold my hand and look at the beautiful, fragile life we had created together. The heavy wooden door of the hospital room slowly creaked open. I looked up with a weak, hopeful smile, expecting to see tears of joy in my husband's eyes. Instead, Jamal walked into the room looking like he was stepping into a corporate boardroom rather than a maternity ward. He was wearing a meticulously tailored charcoal gray Tom Ford suit. His expensive leather shoes clicked sharply and loudly against the linoleum floor. His gold Rolex watch caught the harsh fluorescent light overhead, flashing brightly. He smelled strongly of his signature expensive cologne, a scent that usually brought me immense comfort, but now just smelled overpowering cold, and entirely out of place in a room smelling of antiseptic and blood. Jamal stopped at the foot of my hospital bed. He did not rush to my side to comfort me. He did not lean down to kiss my forehead and tell me I did a good job. He did not even cast a single glance at the two tiny premature infants resting on my chest. His eyes were completely devoid of any warmth or affection. He looked at me with an expression of mild annoyance, as if my traumatic medical emergency was simply an inconvenient scheduling conflict that had ruined his afternoon plans. My heart began to pound heavily against my ribs. The monitors beside me immediately picked up my sudden spike in anxiety, beeping faster and louder. Jamal sighed heavily, showing his irritation, and checked his gold watch. I tried to speak, but my throat was incredibly dry and scratchy. "Jamal, what is wrong?" I managed to whisper. My voice sounded remarkably small and broken. Jamal did not answer me immediately. Instead, he reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. He did not gently hand the envelope to me. He tossed it casually onto my lap right next to where our newborn daughter was sleeping. The envelope landed with a soft thud that echoed in my ears like a loud gunshot. I stared at the yellow paper, completely paralyzed by a sudden wave of confusion. "What is this?" I asked him, my voice trembling. Jamal adjusted his expensive silk tie and looked me dead in the eyes. His voice was perfectly steady and completely devoid of any human emotion. "Those are divorce papers, Charmaine," he said coldly. "I need you to sign them right now." The harsh words hung in the sterile hospital air like a toxic, suffocating cloud. I felt all the air violently leave my lungs. The room started to spin out of control, and a loud ringing noise completely drowned out the steady beep of the heart monitor. "Divorce papers," I repeated numbly. I could not comprehend what he was saying to me. I had just been cut open on an operating table. I had just nearly lost my life bringing our twin children into the world, and my husband was standing there demanding a divorce. I looked down at the thick envelope resting on my legs, and then back up at the man I had loved and supported for years. "Jamal, I do not understand. We just had babies. Why are you doing this to our family?" I pleaded. Tears finally spilled over my eyelashes and rolled down my cheeks, soaking into the thin fabric of my hospital gown. Jamal rolled his eyes and let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Do not make this harder than it has to be, Charmaine," he snapped impatiently. "I am not playing house with you anymore. Vanessa is waiting for me in the G-Wagon downstairs right now. Our flight to St. Bart's leaves in exactly 3 hours, and I am not going to miss my vacation because you decided to have a medical crisis today." Vanessa. The name hit me like a physical blow to the stomach, taking my breath away all over again. Vanessa was the daughter of a prominent commercial real estate tycoon in Atlanta. She was part of the elite social circle that Jamal and his family worshipped. She had generational wealth, she had the right pedigree, and according to Jamal's snobby mother, she was the kind of woman a man like Jamal was supposed to marry. Not a software developer with a toxic family background. Not someone who had to work for every single dollar she ever earned. Jamal had been carrying on a secret affair with her while I was home carrying his children. "You are leaving me for Vanessa," I choked out, fighting the urge to vomit. The severe physical pain of my surgical incision was absolutely nothing compared to the pure agony tearing through my chest. Jamal leaned over the foot of the bed. His face was dangerously close to mine, but there was no love left in his eyes, only pure selfish greed and arrogance. "I am leaving you because you do not belong in my world, Charmaine," he said with a cruel, wicked smirk. "I only married you because I thought your little tech startup would turn into something massive, but it is clearly just a failing project. You are draining my resources and I am entirely done with you. Sign the papers so I can leave." My hands were shaking violently as I tore open the heavy envelope. The dense legal jargon blurred together through my hot tears, but I forced myself to read the specific terms he was demanding. He wanted our marital home. He wanted the joint savings accounts I had helped build. He wanted to leave me with absolutely nothing to my name. But then my eyes caught a very specific and fascinating clause near the bottom of the second page. Jamal had explicitly instructed his high-priced lawyers to write that he willingly and permanently waived all rights, claims, and interests in my software development startup. He had added a specific note stating he refused to be held liable for any of my business debts or current failures. He thought my company was completely worthless. He thought my years of coding and building a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform was just a silly hobby that was doomed to fail. He was so desperate to protect his own trust fund and his new flashy life with Vanessa that he willingly threw away any legal claim to my life's work. A sudden, overwhelming wave of clarity washed over me. The tears abruptly stopped falling. The panic that had been suffocating me suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hardened resolve. I realized in that exact moment that Jamal was not just a terrible, unfaithful husband, he was a complete and utter fool. He did not know that just 2 days prior, my software had passed the final due diligence phase with a massive global tech acquisition firm. He did not know what was coming for him. I did not say another word to him. I did not beg him to stay. I did not scream or throw things at him. I gently adjusted my arm around my sleeping son, picked up the black ink pen resting on the bedside table, and signed my name on every single dotted line he required. I signed away my toxic marriage while holding the beautiful babies he was foolishly abandoning. Jamal snatched the papers back from my lap with a triumphant, arrogant grin. He actually looked deeply proud of himself. "Good girl," he mocked softly. He turned on his expensive leather heels and began walking toward the hospital room door, ready to start his luxurious vacation with his mistress. He thought he had completely destroyed me. He thought I would be left to rot in poverty as a single mother. But before Jamal could even place his hand on the doorknob to leave, the heavy wooden door forcefully swung open from the other side, revealing a new nightmare standing in the hallway. Standing in the doorway was my mother-in-law, Brenda. She was flanked by my brother-in-law, Trey, and his wife, Keisha. Brenda was dressed as if she had just stepped off the pulpit at a mega church on Easter Sunday. She wore an immaculate lavender silk suit, complete with a wide-brimmed matching hat that cast a dark shadow over her heavily powdered face. She gripped a pristine white Chanel handbag tightly in front of her, like a shield against the sterile hospital environment. Behind her, Trey wore a smug, self-satisfied grin that mirrored his brother's exactly. Keisha stood next to him, aggressively chewing a piece of gum, while holding her oversized designer tote bag. None of them looked toward the bed where I lay recovering from major surgery. None of them cast even a fleeting glance at my newborn twins resting on my chest. Their eyes were completely fixed on the thick manila envelope in Jamal's hand. "Did you get it done?" Brenda asked, her voice slicing through the quiet room like a freshly sharpened blade. She did not bother to say hello. She did not ask if I had survived the traumatic delivery. Her only concern was the legal document that would formally erase me from their prestigious family tree. Jamal held up the envelope with a proud, triumphant nod. "She signed everything, Mother. It is completely finished. I am officially free and clear." Brenda let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief and stepped further into my hospital room. The heavy scent of her expensive floral perfume immediately overpowered the smell of antiseptic. She walked right up to the side of my bed, looking down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. I clutched my babies tighter against my skin, feeling the fierce protective instinct of a mother bear rising in my chest. "I told you from the very beginning that a state schoolgirl could never hold on to a man from a legacy. Spellman and Morehouse family," Brenda sneered. Her perfectly painted lips curled into a cruel, mocking smile. "You never belonged in our circle, Charmaine. We are the elite. We come from generations of doctors, lawyers, and real estate moguls. You come from a family of nobodies. You thought you could just marry your way into black high society, but blood always tells. You simply lack the pedigree to stand beside a man of Jamal's stature." I stared back at her, keeping my face completely blank. My surgical incision was throbbing with a blinding white-hot pain, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. "Pedigree," I repeated softly. "Is that what you call a man who abandons his premature children in a hospital room to run off with his mistress?" Brenda let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "Do not you dare speak about Vanessa that way. Vanessa is Jamal's equal in every single regard. Her family owns half of the commercial real estate in downtown Atlanta. She understands the heavy responsibilities of wealth and social standing. She is a true partner for my son. Not a charity case trying to fund a pathetic little kitchen chemistry project with my family's hard-earned money." At that moment, Keisha forcefully pushed her way past Trey to stand next to Brenda. She glared at the two tiny sleeping infants in my arms, her eyes narrowed with pure venom. "You really thought you were so incredibly clever, did not you?" Charmaine, Keisha hissed. "You thought that if you stopped taking your birth control and managed to get knocked up with twins, Jamal would be permanently trapped. You thought those babies were your golden ticket to his trust fund. You thought wrong." I felt a sudden rush of absolute fury burn through my veins. The accusation was so vile and baseless that it momentarily took my breath away. Jamal and I had planned this pregnancy together. We had undergone months of expensive fertility treatments, because he claimed he desperately wanted to be a father. He had held my hand during the ultrasounds and painted the nursery himself. Now he was standing silently by the door, allowing his family to rewrite our entire history to justify his brutal betrayal. They are his children too, Keisha, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. They are innocent babies. How can you stand there and speak about them like they are some kind of malicious financial scheme? Trey let out a loud, mocking chuckle from the doorway. Come on, Charmaine, stop playing the victim. We all know you have been leeching off my brother for years. You maxed out his credit cards trying to build that ridiculous software company of yours. What do you even call it again? Melanin Tech. What a complete joke. You are a terrible businesswoman and an even worse wife. Jamal is just cutting his losses before you drag his credit score down to the gutter with you. Jamal puffed out his chest, looking incredibly validated by his family's cruel words. See, Mother, I handled it just like we discussed. I secured the house, the savings, and the investment portfolios. I am walking away clean. Brenda held out her manicured hand toward her son. Let me see those papers, Jamal. I need to make absolutely certain that your lawyers did their jobs correctly. I will not have this gold-digging woman coming after our assets when her little startup inevitably declares bankruptcy. Jamal obediently handed the thick envelope to his mother. Brenda pulled out the signed divorce agreement and began quickly flipping through the dense legal pages. The room fell into a tense, suffocating silence as her eyes scanned the paragraphs. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor and the soft, quiet breathing of my newborn son. Finally, Brenda's eyes landed on the specific clause located near the bottom of the second page. She adjusted her designer reading glasses and read the words out loud, her voice echoing loudly off the sterile white walls. The husband Jamal completely and permanently waives all rights, claims, ownership, and interests in the wife's business venture known as Melanin Tech. The husband shall bear zero responsibility for any debts, liabilities, or financial obligations associated with said business. Brenda lowered the papers and looked at me with a triumphant, wicked smirk. Well, 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 she mocked softly. It looks like you get to keep your worthless little company all to yourself, Charmaine. I hope you enjoy drowning in your own business debts. Because Jamal is completely legally protected from your failures now. You cannot touch a single dime of his money to save your sinking ship. I swallowed hard, forcing hot tears to well up in my eyes. I desperately needed them to believe that they had completely broken me. I needed them to walk out of this hospital room feeling entirely victorious. Please, Brenda, I sobbed, letting my voice crack perfectly. Please do not do this. I have nothing left. The company is struggling, and I have 2 premature babies to feed. How am I supposed to survive, Jamal? Please, you cannot just leave me with all of the financial burden. My fake display of absolute devastation was the exact performance they all wanted to see. Jamal smirked, checking his shiny gold Rolex watch one more time. You should have thought about that before you became such a massive disappointment, Charmaine. Figure it out yourself. You are an independent woman now. Trey clapped his brother forcefully on the shoulder. Let us go, man. Vanessa is waiting in the car and you have a first-class flight to catch. Do not waste another second looking at this depressing scene. Brenda carefully placed the signed divorce papers back into the manila envelope and handed it to Jamal. She looked down at me one last time, her eyes entirely devoid of any human empathy. Enjoy your miserable life, Charmaine. And do not ever try to contact this family again. We are completely done with you. Without another word, Brenda turned on her heels and marched confidently out of the hospital room, her head held high. Keisha followed closely behind her, rolling her eyes at me, before disappearing into the busy hallway. Trey gave me a sarcastic little wave before walking out. Jamal was the last one to leave. He stood in the doorway, holding the envelope that contained his entire legal downfall. He did not say goodbye to me. He did not look at his newborn son and daughter. He just turned his back and walked away, letting the heavy hospital door slam shut behind him. The loud click of the door latch echoing in the quiet room was the sweetest sound I had ever heard in my entire life. The second I was completely alone, the fake tears instantly stopped rolling down my face. A deep, genuine smile spread slowly across my lips. I looked down at the two beautiful, innocent faces resting peacefully on my chest and kissed their warm little foreheads. "They think they left us with nothing," I whispered softly to my babies. "They think they just won the ultimate victory. But they have absolutely no idea what they just signed away." Brenda thought her son was a brilliant businessman for protecting his precious trust fund from my so-called debts. Jamal thought he had cleverly outsmarted me by refusing to take any ownership of Melanin Tech. They had mocked my life's work. They had called it a pathetic kitchen chemistry project and a massive joke. They did not know that my revolutionary artificial intelligence software, designed to analyze and formulate specialized skincare for women of color, was about to completely disrupt the global beauty industry. They did not know that the world's largest cosmetics conglomerate had already sent a massive team of corporate auditors to verify my patents. And most importantly, they did not know that by aggressively forcing me to sign that specific legal waiver, Jamal had just voluntarily surrendered his legal right to hundreds of millions of dollars. I leaned my head back against the stiff hospital pillow, taking a deep, slow breath. The intense physical pain in my abdomen was still there, but it was suddenly entirely manageable. The crushing weight of my toxic marriage had been completely lifted from my shoulders. Jamal had brought his entire cruel family into my hospital room to publicly humiliate me and ensure my financial ruin. But in their sheer blinding arrogance, they had handed me the most powerful weapon I could ever ask for. My phone buzzed quietly on the bedside table. I carefully reached over and grabbed it. It was a text message from my lead attorney confirming that the final acquisition documents from the major conglomerate were nearly ready for my review. All I had to do was survive the next few weeks playing the role of the desperate abandoned single mother until the divorce decree was legally finalized by a judge. I locked my phone screen and closed my eyes. Jamal and Vanessa were on their way to St. Bart's to celebrate their stolen happiness. Let them drink expensive champagne and post their glamorous vacation photos online. Let Brenda brag to her church friends about her son's wealthy new fiancé. Because the clock was officially ticking on their fake, fragile empire, and I was going to make sure their eventual downfall was absolutely spectacular. But first, I had to figure out how to survive the immediate devastating reality of my current situation. Jamal had drained our bank accounts, leaving me with a mountain of medical bills and two premature babies to feed. Hitting rock bottom was going to be painful, but I knew it was only temporary. The real war had just begun. 2 days after Jamal and his terrible family walked out of my room, the hospital officially cleared me and my twins for discharge. The nurses had been incredibly kind, helping me navigate the overwhelming task of caring for two premature infants, while my own body was still healing from major abdominal surgery. My best friend Simone had taken time off from her nursing job to come pick us up. She pushed me down the long, brightly lit hospital corridor in a wheelchair while I held my sleeping son and daughter tightly against my chest. We made our way to the main billing department to finalize my discharge paperwork and settle the remaining out-of-pocket medical expenses. The billing clerk was a sweet older woman with warm eyes. She smiled kindly at the babies before gently informing me that my final hospital copay was $2,500. I nodded, thanking her, and reached into my purse to retrieve my heavy metal Platinum American Express card. It was a joint account I had shared with Jamal for 5 years. I handed the card over, expecting a quick transaction so I could finally take my children out of this sterile environment. The clerk swiped the heavy card through the machine. A harsh buzzing sound echoed from the terminal. She frowned and tried inserting the chip. The machine beeped aggressively again, displaying a bright red error message. "I am so sorry, honey, but this card is coming up as completely declined," the clerk said, her voice filled with genuine pity. A cold, heavy knot formed instantly in the pit of my stomach. "Declined," I repeated in disbelief. "That is impossible. Please try my debit card." I handed her the blue debit card linked to our primary joint savings account. This was the account where I had deposited every single paycheck from my early consulting jobs. It was the money we were supposed to use for our children's future education. The clerk swiped the debit card. Another harsh buzz. Denied. The clerk looked up at me with a sympathetic expression that made me feel entirely humiliated. She softly suggested that I might want to check with my banking institution. My hands shook violently as I pulled out my phone and opened my mobile banking app. The screen loaded and my heart completely stopped beating. The balance on our joint checking account, which had held over $40,000 just last week, was now at zero. The balance on our joint savings account, which contained over $100,000 of our combined money, was also resting perfectly at zero. I frantically scrolled through the recent transaction history, my eyes scanning the screen in sheer horror. Jamal had not just frozen the accounts. He had systematically drained every single penny we owned in the days leading up to my medical emergency. But one specific transaction stood out glaring at me from the bright screen. An $85,000 wire transfer had been sent directly to an elite luxury jeweler in the wealthy Buckhead district just a few weeks prior. I felt the blood drain completely from my face. Jamal had used the money I had personally worked late nights to earn to purchase Vanessa a massive 5-carat diamond engagement ring. He had stolen the financial safety net meant for his own newborn children to buy a shiny rock for his mistress. The sheer audacity of his financial abuse left me entirely breathless. I was sitting in a hospital wheelchair, bleeding, recovering from surgery, and completely destitute. Simone saw the absolute panic in my eyes. She did not ask any questions. She simply pulled out her own credit card and handed it to the billing clerk, paying my massive medical bill without a second of hesitation. "We will deal with this later," Charmaine Simone whispered fiercely, squeezing my shoulder. "Right now, we just need to get you and these beautiful babies out of here." We drove straight to the sprawling luxury mansion I had shared with Jamal. I needed to pack up my clothing, my computer equipment, and the essential baby supplies before we went to Simone's apartment. When Simone parked her car in the wide paved driveway, my heart sank. Trey's expensive imported sports car was already parked directly in front of the massive double doors. Simone helped me walk up the front steps carrying my babies. When I unlocked the door, the loud sound of Keisha's obnoxious laughter echoed through the grand foyer. Trey and Keisha were lounging casually in my formal living room. Keisha was holding a glass of my expensive sparkling water, and Trey was leaning against the wall looking like a smug security guard. "What are you two doing in my house?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mixture of exhaustion and anger. Trey pushed himself off the wall and crossed his arms over his chest. "This is not your house anymore, Charmaine," he said with a cruel smile. "Jamal asked us to come over and supervise your little move. He wanted to make sure you did not try to steal any of his valuable assets on your way out the door." I stared at him in utter disbelief. "His assets?" I asked loudly. "Half of the things in this house were purchased with my income." Keisha rolled her eyes and set her glass down on the marble coffee table. "Stop being dramatic, Charmaine. Jamal's lawyers have already filed the paperwork. Everything in this property stays right here. You are only permitted to take your personal clothing and your cheap little tech gadgets." I ignored her completely and started walking slowly toward the grand staircase. My C-section scar pulled and burned with every single step I took. I walked into the primary bedroom to grab my designer luggage from the walk-in closet. When I opened the closet door, I realized my expensive Louis Vuitton suitcases were completely gone. "Where is my luggage?" I yelled down the hallway. Trey walked slowly up the stairs carrying a large cardboard box. He threw it onto the hardwood floor right at my feet. The box was filled with cheap, heavy-duty black plastic trash bags. "Jamal paid for those suitcases with his credit card," Trey sneered. "Which means they belong to him. If you want to pack your dresses, you can use these. It is fitting anyway. Trash belongs in trash bags." Tears of pure humiliation and rage burned the back of my eyes. I was a highly educated, successful woman. I was a mother who had just given birth, and I was being forced to pack my entire life into black garbage bags while my husband's vile family stood around mocking me. But I refused to let them see me break. I grabbed a roll of the plastic bags and began painfully pulling my clothing off the hangers. Every time I bent over, the sharp pain in my abdomen flared up violently, causing me to gasp for air. Simone quickly rushed into the closet and took over aggressively, throwing my clothes, my shoes, and my bathroom toiletries into the bags. Keisha stood directly in the doorway of the bedroom, watching us with an entertained smirk. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at a beautiful silk dress Simone was packing. I always hated that dress on you, Charmaine Keisha noted maliciously. You never had the right body type for designer clothing. Vanessa is going to look so much better walking through these halls. I ignored her toxic venom, keeping my focus entirely on breathing through the physical pain. Once my clothes were packed, I walked down the hallway to grab the specific items I truly cared about. I reached up to take down a stunning contemporary African art piece hanging on the wall. It was a painting I had personally selected and purchased from a local black artist at a gallery opening 2 years ago. Before my fingers could even touch the frame, Trey stepped directly in front of me, blocking my path with his large frame. "Do not even think about it," he warned aggressively. "Jamal specifically listed this painting as a high-value investment piece. It stays on the wall." "I bought this painting, Trey," I argued, my voice rising. "I have the receipt in my email." Trey stepped closer, using his physical size to intimidate me. "I do not care what your little email says. Jamal said the art stays and the art stays. Grab your garbage bags and get out of my brother's house before I call the police and report you for trespassing." I looked into Trey's cold, dark eyes and realized there was absolutely no point in fighting them right now. They were petty, desperate people clinging to Jamal's perceived wealth. They had completely bought into the illusion that I was defeated. I took a deep breath, turned my back on the painting, and walked away. Simone and I dragged the heavy black plastic bags down the stairs and loaded them into the trunk of her car. I did not look back at the beautiful house I had helped turn into a home. I knew with absolute certainty that this was not the end of the story. Simone drove us to her small, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of the city. The contrast from the sprawling, wealthy Buckhead mansion was incredibly jarring. Simone's apartment was cramped with mismatched furniture and a tiny galley kitchen. But unlike the massive house I had just been evicted from, Simone's home was filled with genuine love, warmth, and safety. Because space was so incredibly limited, Simone insisted on taking the small sofa in the living room, allowing me to have the only bedroom. We set up a temporary sleeping arrangement for the babies using laundry baskets lined with soft blankets until we could afford to buy proper cribs. It was raining heavily outside, casting dark, gloomy shadows across the small bedroom. I was sitting on the edge of Simone's mattress, surrounded by the black trash bags containing my entire life. The sheer reality of my situation crashed down on me with a suffocating weight. I was a 35-year-old single mother with $0 in my bank account, living out of garbage bags in a borrowed room. I held my tiny son in my left arm and my beautiful daughter in my right, carefully feeding them both from small bottles. The room was completely dark, except for the faint yellow glow of the streetlights filtering through the cheap plastic window blinds. The intense physical exhaustion settled deep into my bones. The dull, throbbing pain in my stomach was a constant reminder of the brutal trauma my body had just endured. Jamal had stolen my money. He had stolen my home. He had stolen my dignity by letting his family treat me like a common criminal. He was currently flying across the ocean to a tropical island with a woman whose family funded her entire existence. He believed he had left me with nothing but massive debt and a ruined future. The silence of the dark bedroom was suddenly shattered. It was exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. My cell phone, resting on the cheap wooden nightstand, suddenly vibrated and lit up the dark room with a bright, glaring light. I carefully shifted my sleeping son against my chest and reached over to grab the phone. I stared at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed an unknown international number. It was a +33 country code, Paris, France. My heart began to pound a completely different rhythm against my ribs. This was not a debt collector. This was not a cruel text message from my former in-laws. This was the specific phone call I had been desperately waiting for since I signed those terrible divorce papers in the hospital room. I took a deep, steadying breath, swiped the green button on the screen, and lifted the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said, my voice barely above an anxious whisper. The line crackled for a split second before a crisp, professional female voice with a thick French accent responded. "Hello, is this Charmaine? This is Celine, the executive assistant to the board of directors at L'Oréal Paris. The board members are just taking their seats in the conference room." We need to establish a secure encrypted connection before we discuss the final valuation. I will call you back on this exact line in precisely 5 minutes. I will be waiting, I replied, my heart pounding wildly against my ribs. The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, cramped bedroom of Simone's apartment staring at the glowing screen of my phone. 5 minutes. My entire life was going to change in 5 minutes. I took a deep, trembling breath and looked down at my beautiful sleeping twins. But before my racing mind could even begin to process what was about to happen, my phone vibrated violently again. I quickly glanced at the caller identification, expecting to see the Paris number return early. Instead, the screen displayed a different international code. Saint Barthélemy, Saint Bart's. A sick feeling washed over my stomach. I knew exactly who was calling. Jamal was supposed to be landing on the island right around this time, but Jamal never called me from unknown international numbers. He would just send cold, demanding text messages through his lawyer. This was someone else. I pressed the green accept button, but before I brought the device to my ear, I quickly tapped the screen recording application on my phone. The red icon flashed, confirming that every single word of this conversation was being captured and saved to my secure cloud storage. Charmaine, honey, is that you? Vanessa's voice oozed through the speaker like toxic artificial syrup. In the background, I could clearly hear the rhythmic crashing of ocean waves and the soft, elegant clinking of crystal champagne glasses. The stark contrast between her luxurious tropical vacation and my depressing reality, sitting on a borrowed mattress, surrounded by garbage bags, was incredibly sharp. I remained completely silent. I wanted her to speak. I wanted her to dig her own grave. Look, I know this is probably a really bad time. Vanessa continued, her tone dripping with fake pity and condescension. Jamal is asleep right now. The poor baby was just so exhausted from dealing with all of your hospital drama today. He needed a massive glass of scotch and a massage just to decompress. But I wanted to call you woman to offer you a little deal. I tightened my grip on the phone, my knuckles turning entirely white, but I kept my mouth firmly shut. The red recording icon continued to blink steadily. Since you are obviously going to be struggling to buy diapers and formula, I spoke to my father about your pathetic situation, Vanessa said casually, as if she were discussing the weather. My family trust is willing to give you a one-time tax-free payment of $50,000. Think about it, Charmaine. $50,000 could really help you get a cheap little apartment somewhere out of the city. Maybe buy a used minivan. She paused, taking a loud sip of her champagne. But of course, this money comes with a very specific condition. You have to sign a legally binding document agreeing to take full sole custody of those twins, and you must completely terminate Jamal's parental rights. We want his name wiped completely off their birth certificates. The sheer cruelty of her demand hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay perfectly quiet. I needed her to explicitly state her horrific reasoning on the recording. Hello, are you even listening to me? Vanessa snapped, her fake sweetness slipping into aggressive annoyance. You need to understand how things work in our social circle, Charmaine. Jamal is about to become my husband. We are going to build a high society brand together. Having two fatherless kids from a failed starter marriage floating around in the background will just ruin Jamal's aesthetic. He cannot be seen as a deadbeat baby daddy, and he definitely does not want to spend his weekends doing awkward custody handoffs at a public park with a bitter ex-wife. Her words were incredibly vile, but they were also a massive legal gift. Take the 50 grand, Charmaine, Vanessa demanded harshly. Take the money, drop Jamal's name from the birth certificates, and disappear. If you try to drag him through family court for child support, my father's legal team will bury you in so much litigation you will never see a single dime anyway. Do the smart thing for once in your life. Be a good little single mother and take the payout. I took a slow, deep breath. My silence was clearly driving her crazy. I will have my lawyers email the custody relinquishment forms to you by tomorrow morning, Vanessa sneered. Have them signed and notarized by Friday, or the money is off the table. Enjoy the garbage bags, Charmaine. Vanessa abruptly ended the call. The loud beep echoed in the quiet bedroom. I immediately saved the audio file, backing it up to 3 different secure servers. Vanessa thought she was intimidating me, but she had just handed me irrefutable recorded evidence of coercion, extortion, and a clear admission that Jamal had absolutely no intention of ever being a father to his children. When the time came for the final custody hearing, that audio clip was going to guarantee that Jamal could never legally come near my son and daughter again. Before I could even set the phone down, the screen lit up brightly once more. The +33 country code flashed across the display. Paris was calling back. I cleared my throat, pushing Vanessa's toxic voice completely out of my mind. I swiped the screen and answered. Charmaine, we have the entire executive board present, Celine announced professionally. I am transferring you to the global director of acquisitions right now. A deep, commanding voice replaced Celine on the line. Good evening, Charmaine. Thank you for your patience. I am Henri, the Global Director of Acquisitions for L'Oréal. I have our Chief Technology Officer and our Head of Global Marketing on the line with me. Good evening, Henri, I replied, forcing my voice to sound confident and steady despite the intense adrenaline coursing through my veins. We have spent the last 72 hours thoroughly reviewing the source code, the clinical trial data, and the patent filings for the Melanin Tech artificial intelligence platform, Henri began. I will be completely honest with you, Charmaine. What you have built in your home office is nothing short of revolutionary. My heart swelled with a fierce sense of pride. Jamal and his family had called my work a pathetic kitchen chemistry project. But the most powerful executives in the global beauty industry were currently sitting in Paris calling my technology revolutionary. The beauty industry has historically failed women of color. Henri continued, his tone serious and respectful. But your algorithm accurately scans melanin density, hydration levels, and genetic hyperpigmentation markers to formulate highly customized skincare profiles. Our engineers tested your software against our current enterprise systems. Your platform outperformed our technology by over 400%. You have completely solved a multi-billion-dollar market gap. Thank you, Henri, I said softly. I built this company because I wanted women who look like me to finally be seen and prioritized. And we want to prioritize you, Henri replied immediately. We know you were seeking a modest seed investment of $500,000 to scale your server capacity and hire a small marketing team. However, the board has unanimously decided that an incubator investment is simply not sufficient for a patent of this massive magnitude. My breath hitched in my throat. My original business plan had been to secure just $500,000 to keep the company afloat and launch a targeted online campaign. If they were rejecting the seed investment, what were they proposing? We do not want to invest in Melanin Tech, Charmaine, Henri stated firmly. We want to acquire it entirely. We want exclusive global rights to your algorithm, your branding, and your patent. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to process his words. An acquisition. They wanted to buy the entire company. Okay, I managed to say, my voice shaking slightly. What are the proposed terms of the acquisition? There was a brief rustling of papers on the other end of the line. We are prepared to offer you an all-cash acquisition, Henri announced. $250 million US, paid completely in full upon the transfer of the intellectual property rights. Furthermore, we want to retain you as the executive visionary consultant for the brand with an annual salary of $2 million. The dark, cramped bedroom of Simone's apartment began to spin violently around me. I stared blankly at the cheap, water-stained ceiling, unable to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the number I had just heard. $250 million. It was not a loan. It was not a staggered payout based on future sales metrics. It was $250 million in pure liquid cash. It was generational wealth on a scale that completely dwarfed the pathetic real estate empire Vanessa's family constantly bragged about. It was enough money to ensure that my twins, their children, and their children's children would never have to struggle or beg for a seat at a table ever again. Charmaine, are you still on the line? Henri asked, gently interpreting my stunned silence. Yes, Henri. I whispered, tears of pure, overwhelming joy finally spilling down my cheeks. Yes, I am here. $250 million. That is an incredibly generous offer. We will have our global legal team draft the binding acquisition contracts and send them to your attorney by tomorrow morning, Henri said, clearly pleased with my reaction. We can close this deal and have the funds wired into your private accounts within 30 days. 30 days. The timeline struck me like a bolt of lightning, instantly snapping me back to reality. My mind began racing through the complex legal implications of my current situation. I had signed the divorce papers in the hospital just a few hours ago. Jamal had forced his lawyers to include that ironclad waiver permanently surrendering his rights to my company. But signing the initial separation agreement was only the very first step in the legal process. According to state law, there was a mandatory waiting period and a required financial mediation hearing before a judge would actually bang the gavel and issue the final absolute divorce decree. Until that judge signed the final piece of paper, Jamal and I were technically still legally married. If news of a $250 million corporate acquisition leaked to the press before my divorce was completely finalized, Jamal and his greedy family would absolutely lose their minds. Jamal would immediately hire a team of ruthless sharks to contest the waiver. He would claim I committed fraud by hiding the true value of the company during the initial settlement. He would drag me through vicious family court battles for years trying to steal half of my life's work. I could not let him touch a single dime of this money. This wealth belonged to me and my children. Henri, I said, my voice suddenly hardening into a tone of absolute authority. I accept your offer, but I have one non-negotiable condition that must be written into the binding contract. Name it, Charmaine Henri replied without hesitation. This entire acquisition process must remain under a strict total non-disclosure agreement until I personally authorize the press release, I instructed firmly. The corporate funds must be transferred into a secure offshore holding account under a blind trust. Absolutely no public announcements, no registry changes, and no media leaks for at least 60 days. If my name or the name of my company hits the news before I give the green light, the deal is entirely off. Understood, Charmaine Henri agreed immediately, clearly respecting my fierce demand for privacy. In the tech industry, stealth acquisitions are very common. We will draft the strictest non-disclosure agreements possible. Your secret is completely safe with us. We finalized a few minor logistical details before Henri ended the call. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap, sitting in the profound silence of the dark room. I looked down at my son and my daughter. Their tiny chests rose and fell in perfect rhythm. We were currently homeless. We had no money for groceries. We were surrounded by cheap plastic garbage bags, holding the few possessions Jamal had allowed us to keep. But in reality, I was now one of the wealthiest self-made Black women in the entire country. The trap was set. Now I just had to play the ultimate game of deception. I had to go into that courtroom looking like a broken, destitute single mother and convince my arrogant husband to legally lock himself out of a billion-dollar empire. The performance of my lifetime was about to begin. Exactly 3 weeks after that life-changing phone call with Paris, I walked through the heavy glass doors of the Fulton County Courthouse. I had spent the morning carefully crafting my appearance to match the exact narrative Jamal expected. I wore a plain beige sweater I found at a local thrift store and a pair of faded black slacks. I skipped makeup entirely, letting the natural dark circles under my eyes show from the sleepless nights of caring for the twins. I needed to look like a defeated, exhausted single mother who had completely given up on life. My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, walked beside me. I had paid his retainer, using a small personal loan Simone had taken out for me, just to keep up appearances. Sterling knew about the L'Oreal acquisition, but he was a seasoned professional who understood the absolute necessity of playing this game flawlessly. We approached the designated mediation room on the 3rd floor. As we turned the corner, I saw them. Jamal and Vanessa were standing outside the heavy oak doors, looking like they were attending a luxury red carpet event instead of a divorce mediation. Jamal was wearing a custom navy pinstripe suit, and Vanessa was draped in a skin-tight white designer dress that screamed new money. They were leaning against the marble wall, holding hands and laughing loudly. The bright fluorescent hallway lights caught the matching diamond Rolex watches on their wrists. They were purposefully flashing their wealth, trying to intimidate me before we even stepped into the room. Jamal noticed me approaching, and his laughter abruptly stopped. He looked me up and down, taking in my plain clothes and tired face. A cruel, smug smile spread across his lips. "You look terrible, Charmaine," he said loudly. echoing down the quiet hallway. I guess reality is finally setting in. I kept my head down, staring at the tiled floor, pretending to be entirely humiliated. I did not say a single word. Sterling gently placed his hand on my shoulder and guided me into the mediation room. The room was cold and intimidating, with a large mahogany table dominating the center. A stern-looking mediator named Judge Davis was already seated at the head of the table, organizing a massive stack of legal files. Jamal and Vanessa sauntered in right behind us. Vanessa had the audacity to pull up a chair directly next to Jamal, aggressively inserting herself into a legal proceeding where she did not belong. Across from us sat Jamal's attorney, Richard Vance. Vance was notorious in Atlanta for being a ruthless, high-priced shark who specialized in protecting the generational wealth of cheating husbands. He wore a patronizing smile as he opened his leather briefcase and pulled out the settlement documents. "Let us make this quick," Vance began, his voice dripping with condescension. "My client is a very busy man, and he has a flight to catch this evening for a charity gala. We are here to finalize the separation of assets and establish the financial boundaries of this dissolution." Judge Davis adjusted her glasses and looked at me with a hint of sympathy. "Mrs. Sterling, has your client reviewed the initial terms proposed by Mr. Vance?" Sterling nodded calmly. "We have, Your Honor. And frankly, we find the proposed alimony and child support figures to be completely inadequate for a mother raising premature twins." Vance let out a loud, theatrical sigh and tossed his gold pen onto the table. "Come on, Sterling, let us be realistic here. Your client is a fully capable adult. My client is generously offering $5,000 a month in combined alimony and child support for a period of exactly 2 years. That is more than enough time for her to find a regular 9-to-5 job and support herself. Jamal is not a bottomless ATM machine. $5,000 a month," I whispered, keeping my voice shaky and fragile. "Jamal, you know the babies. Medical bills alone are triple that amount. How am I supposed to pay for their specialized formula and physical therapy?" Jamal rolled his eyes and leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms defensively. "That sounds like a personal problem, Charmaine. You wanted to keep the kids, so you figure it out. I am giving you a very generous transition fund. You should be thanking me." Vance tapped the legal document with his finger, redirecting the conversation. "Furthermore, we need to address the elephant in the room, the wife's so-called business venture." He paused, letting a nasty smirk cross his face before continuing. "My client's forensic accountants have looked at the limited financial records of this melanin tech project. It is essentially a glorified kitchen chemistry project, operating entirely in the red. It holds zero market value and carries significant outstanding liabilities." Vanessa giggled softly, leaning her head against Jamal's shoulder. "A kitchen chemistry project," she whispered loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "That is so embarrassing." Vance ignored her and looked directly at Judge Davis. "Your Honor, my client insists on a permanent ironclad severance from this business. We are demanding that a specific indemnification clause be added to the final decree, explicitly stating that Jamal bears absolutely zero responsibility for Melanin Tech, its current debts, or its inevitable future bankruptcy." Jamal suddenly sat forward, slamming his hands flat against the mahogany table. He looked panicked for a brief second, terrified that the judge might somehow force him to pay my imaginary debts. "I want it on the official record right now," Jamal demanded, aggressively interrupting his own lawyer. "I want absolutely nothing to do with that company. I will not pay a single dime to fund her delusions. She took out loans, she maxed out credit cards, and I am not letting her drag my financial portfolio down with her. The company is completely hers, and I permanently waive any right to it. Write it down." This was the exact moment. This was the trap he was actively setting for himself. All I had to do was push him over the edge and make him believe that signing away his rights was the greatest victory of his life. I took a deep, ragged breath and forced a massive wave of tears to well up in my eyes. I let my lower lip tremble and covered my face with my trembling hands. A loud, broken sob escaped my throat, echoing loudly in the quiet mediation room. "Please, Jamal," I begged, looking up at him with tear-streaked cheeks. "Please do not completely cut me off from the company. You know how much I need the financial backing right now." The servers are expensive, and I cannot keep it running without your family's investment capital. If you completely sever yourself, I will lose everything I have worked for. Please, I just need a little more time and a little more money to make it successful. I reached my hand across the table toward him, acting completely desperate and shattered. You promised you would support my dreams when we got married, Jamal. We are supposed to be a team. How can you just abandon me and our babies and my entire life's work? How am I going to survive without you? My performance was flawless. The raw desperation in my voice, the pathetic pleading, the tears streaming down my face, it was everything Jamal needed to validate his massive ego. He looked down at my outstretched hand with utter disgust and quickly pulled his own arms back as if my touch would infect him with poverty. Vanessa scoffed loudly, looking at me like I was a piece of trash stuck to her shoe. Have some dignity, Charmaine, she sneered. Begging a man who clearly does not want you is just pathetic. Jamal puffed out his chest, looking incredibly powerful and entirely overly confident. He looked at Judge Davis with a hard, unyielding glare. You see this, Your Honor. This is exactly what I am talking about. She is trying to use me to fund a failing business. I refuse. I want the waiver finalized and signed today. I want it legally bulletproof so she can never ever come after me for a single cent regarding Melanin Tech. Judge Davis looked at me, her expression softening with genuine pity. She obviously believed I was a desperate, heartbroken woman grasping at straws. Charmaine, are you absolutely sure you understand what you are giving up? If we finalize this waiver, your husband will have no legal obligation to assist you with any business debts, but he will also have no claim to any future profits. I let out another loud, tragic sob and nodded my head weakly. I know, Your Honor, I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. But he is leaving me no choice. Jamal smiled a wide, victorious smile that showed all of his perfectly white teeth. He turned to his shark lawyer. Print the final version, Vance. Print it right now and let us get this over with. I am done playing games with this woman. Vance quickly pulled a portable printer from his briefcase and connected it to his laptop. The quiet humming of the machine printing the legally binding documents filled the tense room. Every single page that printed was another nail in Jamal's financial coffin. I kept my head bowed, letting the tears continue to fall silently onto my lap. I wiped my eyes with a cheap tissue, playing the role of the shattered victim to absolute perfection. Jamal leaned over and whispered something into Vanessa's ear, making her giggle again. They were completely blinded by their own arrogance. They thought they were watching me hit absolute rock bottom. They thought my desperate begging was genuine terror at losing Jamal's precious trust fund. They had absolutely no idea that my tears were actually masking the intense, burning desire to laugh out loud. I was begging him to stay connected to the company just to make him violently run in the opposite direction. It was a basic psychological trick, and his massive, fragile ego fell for it hook, line, and sinker. The trap was set, and the door was swinging shut right behind him. The portable printer finally stopped humming, pushing out the last page of the freshly revised separation agreement. The crisp white paper rested on the mahogany table like a loaded weapon. Richard Vance picked it up, adjusting his expensive glasses as he scanned the freshly printed text. He nodded in sheer satisfaction, sliding the document across the smooth wood toward Jamal. Here it is, Vance announced proudly. A complete and total indemnification clause. You are entirely severed from Melanin Tech. You have absolutely no legal or financial ties to her business venture moving forward. Jamal did not even bother to read the fine print. He aggressively snatched the gold pen from his lawyer's hand. His eyes were wide with a frantic, arrogant energy. He wanted to lock in his imaginary victory before I could supposedly change my mind and demand his money. Judge Davis raised her hand, signaling for him to pause. Mr. Vance, before your client signs that document, I need to state for the official record that I strongly advise against making rushed financial decisions during mediation. She warned, her voice echoing with judicial authority. Mr. Jamal, you are legally forfeiting any potential future equity or profit share in a business founded during your marriage. Once this is signed and stamped by the court, it is completely irreversible. Are you absolutely certain you wish to proceed with this specific waiver? Jamal let out a loud, exasperated sigh, rolling his eyes at the judge. Your Honor, I am a professional wealth manager, he stated, his voice dripping with condescending pride. I analyze profitable investments for a living. I know a sinking ship when I see one. My ex-wife's little startup is drowning in debt and has zero market viability. I refuse to be held liable for her financial mistakes. I'm entirely certain. I want to sign it right now. Vanessa gently stroked his arm, looking at him with absolute adoration. You are so smart, baby, she cooed softly. Protect your assets. Jamal slammed the tip of the gold pen onto the paper. He signed his name with large, aggressive strokes, pressing down so hard I thought the paper might tear. He flipped to the next page and signed again. His signature was large and sloppy, driven by pure, selfish adrenaline. With every flick of his wrist, he was legally surrendering his rights to a multi-million-dollar fortune. He slid the document across the table toward me. Your turn, Charmaine, he ordered harshly. Sign it and let me get out of here. I kept my head bowed, letting my shoulders shake as if I were crying uncontrollably. My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, leaned over and gently pushed the document closer to me. I picked up a basic black pen with a violently trembling hand. I allowed one final tear to fall directly onto the signature line, smudging the ink slightly as I wrote my name. I signed away my right to his house. I signed away my right to his savings. I signed away my right to ask for anything more than the pathetic $5,000 a month he was offering. And finally, I signed the ironclad waiver that made me the sole exclusive owner of Melanin Tech. Sterling gathered the papers and handed them to Judge Davis. She reviewed the signatures meticulously, checking every single page to ensure the legal formatting was perfectly executed. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Jamal was practically bouncing his knee under the table, anxious to leave and start his luxurious new life. Judge Davis closed the heavy file folder and reached for her wooden gavel. Based on the signed agreements presented before me today, and confirming that both parties have entered into this contract willfully, I hereby approve this separation of assets, she announced, her voice ringing with absolute finality. The court finds this marriage irretrievably broken. She raised the wooden gavel high into the air. I hereby declare this marriage officially dissolved. The heavy gavel struck the wooden-sounding block with a loud, sharp crack. The sound echoed off the cold courtroom walls. It was the absolute sweetest sound I had ever heard. The legal chains binding me to Jamal's toxic narcissistic abuse were permanently shattered. The second that gavel hit the block, my fake tears stopped instantly. The violent trembling in my hands vanished completely. The pathetic, broken posture I had maintained for the last hour evaporated into thin air. I sat up perfectly straight, rolling my shoulders back and taking a deep, clear breath. I reached up and wiped the remaining moisture from my cheeks, my face transforming into a mask of pure, cold steel. Jamal was busy standing up and buttoning his expensive suit jacket, completely missing my sudden physical transformation. He grabbed Vanessa's hand and looked over at me with a victorious smirk. Good luck paying for those servers, Charmaine, he mocked. I did not cry. I did not beg. I simply looked Jamal dead in the eye and offered him a slow, terrifyingly calm smile. Goodbye, Jamal, I said, my voice perfectly steady and entirely devoid of emotion. He frowned, slightly confused by my sudden shift in tone. But before his arrogant brain could process what was happening, I turned my back on him and confidently walked out of the mediation room. My heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, echoing with power and authority. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the brightly lit hallway. I immediately reached into my purse and pulled out my cell phone. I bypassed all my personal messages and opened the encrypted communication application I had installed specifically for the L'Oréal legal team. I typed a single short message to Henri, the global director of acquisitions in Paris. The divorce is legally finalized. Execute the contract. I hit send. I took a deep breath of the stale courthouse air, feeling completely weightless. Jamal thought he had buried me alive. He had absolutely no idea he had just planted the seeds for his own ultimate destruction. Exactly 1 week later, the heavy gray clouds over Atlanta broke open, unleashing a massive torrential downpour. I was sitting on the floor of Simone's cramped apartment, folding a pile of tiny baby clothes. The small space was humid and smelled faintly of baby formula and cheap laundry detergent. I had spent the last 7 days laying incredibly low, refusing to post anything on social media and ignoring the cruel text messages Jamal's family occasionally sent to gloat. Simone was in the tiny galley kitchen boiling water when a loud, aggressive knock suddenly echoed against the thin apartment door. I carefully set down my sleeping son and stood up, adjusting my simple cotton t-shirt. Simone wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the front door. Standing in the dingy, poorly lit hallway of the apartment complex was Keisha. She looked entirely out of place, wearing a bright pink Chanel tweed jacket and carrying an umbrella that probably cost more than Simone's monthly rent. Keisha looked around the cheap hallway with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust, wrinkling her nose as if the very air was contaminating her. "What do you want, Keisha?" I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. Keisha pushed her way past Simone and stepped into the small living room. She looked down at the laundry baskets serving as makeshift cribs and let out a harsh, judgmental laugh. "Wow, Charmaine," she sneered, taking in my humble surroundings. "Jamal really did leave you with absolutely nothing. This place is a complete dump. I'm surprised the state has not taken those kids away from you yet." I felt a flash of anger, but I quickly suppressed it. I did not have the energy to trade petty insults with a woman who lived her entire life trying to impress a family that secretly despised her. "State your business, Keisha, and get out," I demanded firmly. Keisha smirked and unclasped her designer handbag. She reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope made of expensive textured cream paper. The edges were lined with thick, shimmering gold foil, and a massive wax seal held it closed. She held it out toward me, holding it between two fingers like it was a royal decree. "Jamal and Vanessa wanted me to hand-deliver this to you," Keisha announced proudly, her voice dripping with venom. "It is an invitation to their wedding." I stared at the obnoxious gold envelope without reaching for it. "Why would I ever attend my ex-husband's wedding?" I asked flatly. "Oh, they do not actually expect you to come," Keisha laughed cruelly. "They just wanted to make sure you knew exactly what you were missing out on. Vanessa's father is paying for the entire thing. The budget is over $2 million, Charmaine. Can you even comprehend that much money? $2 million for one single night." Keisha stepped closer, aggressively waving the gold envelope in my face. "They rented out the entire botanical garden. They hired a Michelin star celebrity chef to cater a 5-course meal. The floral arrangements alone cost more than that pathetic little software company you have been crying over. Vanessa is wearing a custom gown flown in straight from Milan. It is going to be the social event of the decade. Jamal is finally marrying a woman who belongs in our world." She tossed the heavy envelope onto the small, cheap coffee table. It landed with a loud thud, mocking the cramped space around it. "I just thought you should have a physical reminder of exactly where you stand," Keisha mocked, taking a step back toward the door. "You are just a forgotten mistake, Charmaine. A tiny little footnote in Jamal's life. He is moving on to bigger and better things, and you are going to rot in this tiny little box." Before I could even formulate a response, my cell phone resting on the kitchen counter suddenly vibrated. A bright notification illuminated the screen. Then another vibration. And another. The phone began buzzing continuously, signaling a massive incoming data transfer. I walked over to the counter and picked up the device. I unlocked the screen and opened my secure private wealth management application. The screen loaded, displaying my new offshore banking details. The stark black numbers jumped off the bright white background, completely blinding me for a split second. Available balance: $200 million. The massive acquisition funds had successfully cleared international customs and deposited directly into my personal accounts. The taxes had already been deducted by the corporate holding firm. $200 million of pure liquid untraceable cash was sitting directly in my name. I stared at the incredible string of zeros. The sheer magnitude of the wealth radiating from that tiny digital screen was absolutely staggering. Keisha was standing in my living room bragging about a $2 million wedding budget funded by Vanessa's daddy. She was trying to make me feel small by waving a gold foil invitation in my face. She thought $2 million was the absolute pinnacle of human success. She had no idea she was standing in the presence of a woman who could buy Vanessa's entire family bloodline in cash and still have enough money left over to buy the botanical gardens they were getting married in. "Well," Keisha snapped, her voice cutting through the quiet room. Do not. You have anything to say? Are you going to cry again? I slowly locked my phone screen, sliding the device into my back pocket. I turned around to face my former sister-in-law. All the tension, all the anger, and all the exhaustion completely drained from my body. A slow, wide, entirely genuine smile spread across my face. It was a smile so deeply rooted in absolute power and confidence that it caused Keisha to physically take a step backward. Her arrogant sneer faltered, replaced by a look of sudden confusion. Thank you, Keisha, I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. Keisha blinked, her perfectly manicured eyelashes fluttering in surprise. Thank you, she repeated suspiciously. What are you thanking me for? I just told you your ex-husband is spending millions of dollars on another woman. I picked up the heavy gold foil invitation from the coffee table, weighing it casually in my hand. I am thanking you for the invitation, Keisha. Please tell Jamal and Vanessa that I deeply appreciate them thinking of me. I smiled even wider, looking her directly in the eyes. In fact, you can tell them I will absolutely be making an appearance. I would not miss their special day for the world. Keisha stared at me, her mouth slightly open. She had come here expecting me to break down into hysterical sobs. She expected me to throw the invitation back in her face or scream out of pure jealousy. My complete lack of anger and my terrifyingly calm demeanor completely short-circuited her brain. You are crazy, she muttered, pulling her Chanel jacket tighter around her chest. You're actually losing your mind. Have a safe drive back to the suburbs, Keisha, I offered politely, gesturing toward the open front door. And be careful in the rain. Keisha practically ran out of the apartment, slamming the door loudly behind her. Simone walked out of the kitchen, her eyes wide with shock. Charmaine? What was that about? Simone asked, staring at the gold envelope in my hand. Why on earth would you agree to go to his wedding? I looked at my best friend and let out a bright, genuine laugh. It was the first time I had truly laughed in months. Because Simone, I replied, tossing the gold envelope into the nearest trash can. By the time that wedding date rolls around, Jamal is not going to have a single penny to his name, and I want a front row seat to watch his entire fake empire burn to the ground. 6 months passed. 6 glorious, quiet months of rebuilding my life exactly the way I wanted it. The summer heat descended on Atlanta, bringing with it the kind of sticky humidity that made people seek refuge in air-conditioned mansions and exclusive country clubs. Jamal and Vanessa were throwing a massive midsummer soiree at their newly purchased estate in the prestigious Tuxedo Park neighborhood. According to the loud, boastful updates Brenda constantly posted on her social media, the party was meant to celebrate Jamal's recent promotion at his wealth management firm and to show off their lavish new lifestyle to Atlanta's black elite. I was not physically there, of course, but thanks to a few loyal friends still embedded in that social circle, I had a crystal-clear picture of the event. Brenda was holding court near the sprawling infinity pool, wearing another oversized designer hat and sipping a perfectly crafted mint julep. She was loudly bragging to her church friends about her son's brilliant financial acumen and how Vanessa's family connections had completely transformed his career trajectory. Jamal was standing near the outdoor bar wearing a custom linen suit with the sleeves rolled up, looking every bit the wealthy, successful patriarch he pretended to be. He was swirling a glass of expensive aged whiskey, laughing loudly with his fraternity brothers, and pretending that his previous marriage had never existed. He had successfully erased me and his twin children from his carefully curated public image, but while Jamal was busy pouring expensive liquor for his superficial friends, the rest of the world was waking up to a completely different reality. It was exactly 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. I was sitting in the corner office of my new corporate headquarters located in a sleek glass high-rise in Midtown Atlanta. My assistant poured me a fresh cup of artisan coffee while my styling team made a few final adjustments to my hair and makeup. Today was the day the strict non-disclosure agreement officially expired. Across the internet, Forbes Women published its highly anticipated annual issue, highlighting the most powerful and influential female billionaires and centimillionaires in the world. The digital cover dropped simultaneously on every major social media platform, news outlet, and financial publication globally. The image was absolutely striking. I was wearing a sharply tailored emerald green power suit, sitting confidently in a modern velvet chair. My hair was styled in flawless natural curls, framing my face with an air of absolute authority. My eyes looked directly into the camera, projecting strength, resilience, and undeniable power. But it was the headline plastered in bold, elegant text across the bottom of the cover that was destined to completely destroy Jamal's fragile ego. How Charmaine turned a kitchen chemistry project into a $250 million L'Oreal acquisition. The accompanying article was a massive multi-page spread detailing my entire journey. It outlined the revolutionary artificial intelligence algorithm I had built, the intense secret negotiations with the global beauty conglomerate, and the strategic decision to remain completely hidden during the acquisition process. The piece highlighted my dedication to creating skincare solutions for women of color and praised my business acumen for securing an all-cash buyout. The internet absolutely exploded. Within minutes, my name was trending globally on Twitter. Major news networks were broadcasting my Forbes cover on their morning financial segments. Influential tech bloggers and beauty industry moguls were resharing the article, praising my incredible silent victory. The story of a young Black mother who secretly built a multi-million-dollar empire from her home office was the ultimate inspirational narrative. Back at the lavish Tuxedo Park mansion, the lively atmosphere of Jamal's party was abruptly shattered. According to my friend who was standing just a few feet away from him, Jamal's cell phone suddenly vibrated violently in his pocket. He pulled it out, annoyed by the interruption, but the notifications were pouring in faster than his screen could refresh. Ping, ping, ping. Texts from his college fraternity brothers. Direct messages from his wealth management colleagues. Links forwarded by panicked family members. Did you see this, bro? Is this your ex-wife? Jamal, tell me you got a cut of this money. Jamal frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He opened the first text message, tapping on the link to the Forbes Women digital publication. The high-resolution cover image of me sitting in the emerald green power suit immediately loaded on his screen. His eyes scanned the bold headline. $250 million L'Oreal acquisition. He stared at the words, kitchen chemistry project. The exact derogatory phrase his own lawyer, Richard Vance, had used to humiliate me during our divorce mediation. The phrase I had deliberately fed to the Forbes journalist to make sure Jamal knew exactly who was responsible for his downfall. The expensive crystal whiskey glass slipped from Jamal's suddenly numb fingers. It hit the polished marble patio floor with a loud, sharp crash, shattering into hundreds of glittering pieces. The amber liquid splashed across his expensive leather shoes, but he did not even flinch. The loud noise drew the attention of the surrounding guests. The music seemed to fade into the background as everyone turned to look at the host. Vanessa rushed over, her high heels clicking quickly against the stone. "Baby, what is wrong?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. Jamal could not speak. The blood had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He slowly raised his phone, turning the screen toward his new wife. Vanessa looked at this bright screen. Her perfectly manicured hands flew to her mouth, covering a loud, sharp gasp. "No," she whispered, stepping backward as if the phone were physically burning her. "No, that is impossible. She was broke. She was packing her clothes in garbage bags." The whispers began circulating through the wealthy crowd instantly. People were quickly pulling out their own phones, loading the Forbes article, and staring at the shocking headline. The news spread through the party like wildfire, completely consuming the carefully crafted illusion Jamal and Vanessa had built. Brenda pushed her way through the growing crowd, demanding to know what was happening. When Trey handed her his phone displaying the article, her knees actually buckled. She had to grab onto the outdoor bar just to keep from collapsing onto the wet marble floor. $250 million, Brenda choked out, her voice trembling violently. She had that money the entire time. Jamal's mind raced frantically, trying to process the magnitude of the situation. He remembered the hospital room. He remembered the divorce mediation. He remembered aggressively demanding that the judge sign the waiver, completely severing his rights to melanin tech. He remembered his arrogant lawyer printing the indemnification clause right there in the room. "I signed it away," Jamal whispered, his voice cracking with absolute terror. "I signed the waiver. I gave her the entire company. He had voluntarily, legally, and permanently forfeited his claim to $500 million just to protect his own pathetic trust fund. He had handed me the greatest financial victory of my life on a silver platter because he was too arrogant to believe a woman could build an empire without his help. The humiliation was immediate and absolute. The party guests who just minutes ago were praising his financial brilliance were now looking at him with a mixture of pity and sheer disbelief. The greatest wealth manager in Atlanta had just made the worst financial decision in the history of the city, and the nightmare was only just beginning for him. The party at the Tuxedo Park mansion did not just end, it completely imploded. Guests awkwardly made their excuses and fled to their luxury cars, leaving Jamal and Vanessa standing alone among the shattered crystal and melted ice. The Forbes article was just the first domino to fall. Within 48 hours, the brilliant facade of Vanessa's generational wealth completely evaporated, exposing a massive, horrifying financial sinkhole. Vanessa's father, the supposed commercial real estate tycoon, was an absolute fraud. His entire empire was built on a towering mountain of highly leveraged toxic debt. Following the global pandemic, his commercial properties had sat entirely empty. Rent collections plummeted while the interest on his massive loans continued to skyrocket. He had been secretly shifting money between shell companies just to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth for his spoiled daughter. There was no family trust fund. There was no endless supply of cash. The $2 million botanical garden wedding they had been bragging about was entirely financed by high-interest predatory loans. When the truth finally came crashing down, it took Jamal down with it. Jamal had always considered himself a genius wealth manager, but his massive ego and desperate greed had completely blinded him. He had drained every single joint account he shared with me to buy Vanessa that 5-carat diamond ring. He had taken out a massive high-interest mortgage under his own name to purchase the Tuxedo Park mansion solely to impress her bankrupt father. He had fully expected Vanessa's imaginary trust fund to cover the mortgage payments. Now the bank was violently calling in the debts. Jamal's prestigious wealth management firm fired him immediately, citing the massive public embarrassment of the Forbes article and his clear lack of financial judgment. Without his massive corporate salary, and with Vanessa's family officially declaring bankruptcy, Jamal was left holding the bag. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on his beautiful mansion just 3 months after he bought it. His luxury cars were actively being tracked for repossession. He was completely trapped in a nightmare of his own making, tied to a woman who had absolutely nothing to offer him. The absolute panic inside their household was entirely predictable. According to the same social circles that had once worshipped them, the newlywed couple spent their days screaming at each other. Vanessa blamed Jamal for losing his high-paying job and being completely humiliated by his ex-wife on a global stage. Jamal blamed Vanessa for lying about her trust fund and tricking him into a mountain of insurmountable debt. Brenda, my former mother-in-law, who had so proudly championed Vanessa as the perfect upper-class addition to her family, suddenly found herself completely ostracized from her elite church groups. The women who used to praise her now whispered behind her back, pointing out that her genius son had voluntarily signed away a $250 million fortune. Brenda locked herself inside her house, refusing to answer calls from Trey and Keisha. Speaking of Keisha, she was suddenly entirely silent. There were no more obnoxious visits to my apartment. There were no more gold foil invitations. They were all drowning in the sheer absolute humiliation of their own greedy choices. While Jamal's entire fake reality was rapidly collapsing into dust, my new life was ascending to heights I had only ever dreamed of. It was a cool Friday evening in late October. I was standing in the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Atlanta, preparing for the most important night of my professional career. I was hosting a massive charity gala to officially launch a foundation dedicated to funding Black female tech entrepreneurs. My styling team had just finished adjusting my dress. I was wearing a stunning floor-length custom gown made of deep sapphire blue silk. The fabric gathered perfectly at my waist, hiding the faint silver scar from my emergency C-section. A delicate diamond necklace rested against my collarbone, a gift to myself to celebrate the massive L'Oreal acquisition. Simone was sitting on the plush, velvet sofa, holding my son, while my daughter slept peacefully in a nearby bassinet. We had long ago moved out of her cramped apartment and now lived in a massive, beautiful estate with a full staff of nannies and security. I looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror, taking a deep breath of absolute satisfaction. I had won. I had survived the darkest betrayal imaginable and built an empire from the ashes. Just as I was reaching for my diamond clutch, my cell phone began to ring. The sound vibrated sharply against the marble vanity. I walked over and glanced at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed a name I had not seen on my personal device in exactly 6 months. Jamal. I stared at the name, watching the screen flash repeatedly. A small, cold smile touched the corners of my lips. I knew exactly why he was calling. The absolute desperation had finally broken his massive, arrogant ego. I picked up the phone and pressed the green button, lifting the device to my ear. I did not say hello. I just waited in complete silence. Charmaine. Jamal's voice cracked over the phone line. He sounded absolutely pathetic. There was no trace of the smug, arrogant wealth manager who had tossed those divorce papers onto my hospital bed. He sounded like a broken, terrified child. In the background, I could hear the loud, hollow echo of an empty house. The bank had probably already begun repossessing his expensive furniture. Charmaine, please do not hang up. He begged, his voice trembling violently. Please, I just need you to listen to me for 1 minute. I remained perfectly quiet, letting him sit in the agonizing silence. I made a mistake. Charmaine. Jamal sobbed, the sound of his tears wet and desperate through the speaker. I know what I did. I abandoned you and our newborn twins to marry another woman. I threw those divorce papers in your face while you were bleeding in that hospital bed, and I told you to sign them immediately so I could catch a flight with my mistress. I forced you to sign away everything while you were holding our fragile babies. I know I did that to you. I am so incredibly sorry. I was out of my mind. His pathetic attempt to recite the exact traumatic events of my life, as if he were suddenly struck by profound moral clarity, was entirely nauseating. He did not feel bad for abandoning his premature children. He felt bad because the woman he abandoned them for turned out to be completely bankrupt, while the woman he discarded turned out to be a $250 million tech mogul. Vanessa tricked me, Charmaine, Jamal cried loudly, his voice echoing with sheer desperation. She lied to me about everything. Her family has absolutely no money. They are completely broke. Her father is a total fraud who owes millions of dollars to the banks. She manipulated me into buying this massive house, and now they are foreclosing on it tomorrow. I lost my job, Charmaine. I lost my cars. I have absolutely nothing left. That sounds like a personal problem, Jamal, I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of any human empathy. Just like you told me in the mediation room. You figure it out. No, Charmaine, please. Jamal begged, his voice rising in panic. We are family. I miss you. I miss my son and my daughter so much. I lay awake every single night thinking about my twins. I want to come home to you. I want to be a real father to them. We can fix this. I know we can. I let out a slow, cold laugh that completely cut through his pathetic sobbing. You do not miss your children, Jamal. You miss my bank account. You permanently signed away your parental rights months ago in exchange for Vanessa's fake trust fund money. You do not have a son or a daughter. You have a mountain of debt and a lying wife. Jamal's sobbing abruptly stopped. The fake remorse vanished instantly, entirely replaced by the vicious, greedy monster I knew he truly was. Fine. Jamal snapped, his voice turning sharp and incredibly aggressive. If you want to play it that way, we can play it that way. You lied to me, Charmaine. You completely committed fraud. I adjusted the diamond necklace resting against my skin, staring at my perfect reflection in the mirror. Fraud? I asked casually. Yes, fraud, Jamal yelled through the phone. My lawyer, Richard Vance, has been completely reviewing the timeline of your little Forbes article. You were already negotiating that massive L'Oreal acquisition before the judge signed the final divorce decree. You deliberately hid a $250 million asset during our marital mediation. That completely invalidates the waiver I signed in that courtroom. He paused, taking a loud, ragged breath. Vance found a legal loophole, Charmaine. That company was officially founded during our marriage. I do not care what that stupid piece of paper says. I am legally entitled to half of that acquisition money. That is $125 million. You either wire me $10 million right now to save my house, or Vance and I are going to drag you into federal court and completely freeze all of your offshore assets. I will ruin your entire brand. He was panting heavily over the line, completely convinced that his aggressive legal threat would suddenly terrify me into submission. He thought I was still the crying, helpless woman sitting in the hospital bed. He had absolutely no idea that I had spent the last 6 months meticulously planning for this exact phone call. I did not scream at him. I did not cry. I did not try to argue the strict legalities of the indemnification clause he had aggressively demanded. Jamal, I said, my voice dropping into a tone of absolute terrifying calmness. If you really think you are entitled to half of my money, I strongly encourage you to come and claim it. What did you just say? Jamal asked, his voice faltering slightly, entirely confused by my complete lack of fear. Bring your lawyer, Jamal, I instructed smoothly. Bring Richard Vance. Bring your mother, Brenda. Bring Trey and Keisha. Bring your fake wealthy wife, Vanessa. Bring every single person who stood in that hospital room and laughed at me. I am hosting a massive charity gala tonight at the Four Seasons in downtown Atlanta. The doors open at 8 o'clock sharp. I grabbed my diamond clutch from the marble vanity and turned toward the door. If you think you are entitled to half bring your lawyer to my gala tonight, I laughed coldly. I will make sure you get exactly what you deserve. I ended the call and tossed the phone into my designer evening clutch. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel had been completely transformed into a breathtaking vision of Black excellence and technological innovation. Hanging crystal chandeliers cast a warm, brilliant golden glow over the massive room, illuminating the intricate architectural details of the ceiling. The round dining tables were draped in rich midnight blue velvet and adorned with towering floral arrangements of rare white orchids and hydrangeas. Tonight was the inaugural launch of my philanthropic foundation, dedicated entirely to funding Black women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It was a celebration of my success and a promise to lift others up with me. The room was packed wall to wall with the absolute most powerful and influential figures in Atlanta. The mayor was sitting at the head table chatting animatedly with the chief executive officer of a massive global venture capital firm. Prominent tech investors, local politicians, philanthropic moguls, and industry leaders were all sipping expensive vintage champagne and waiting for my highly anticipated keynote address. I stood alone on the raised VIP balcony, looking down at the magnificent empire I had built from the ashes of my broken marriage. I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. I was no longer the frightened, exhausted woman crying in a hospital bed. I was a titan in my industry. But down in the main lobby, a completely different, chaotic scene was rapidly unfolding. I had specifically instructed my elite private security detail to deny entry to anyone who was not explicitly listed on the heavily vetted guest roster. But absolute desperation makes greedy people incredibly resourceful. According to the furious hotel management, Jamal had drained the absolute last of his remaining credit cards to blatantly bribe a junior service elevator guard. Just as the classical string quartet finished playing their elegant opening performance, the heavy, solid mahogany doors at the back of the grand ballroom violently burst open. The loud crashing sound echoed over the soft ambient music. Hundreds of heads turned instantly toward the entrance. Standing in the wide doorway, breathing heavily like a cornered animal, was the absolute worst mistake of my past. Jamal led the pack, looking frantic and entirely unhinged. His previously pristine custom suit was deeply wrinkled, and his eyes were wild with greedy, feral desperation. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. Next to him was his sleazy, high-priced lawyer, Richard Vance, clutching a thick leather briefcase tightly against his chest like it held winning lottery tickets. Behind them came the rest of the toxic family circus. Vanessa was wearing an outdated, flashy cocktail dress, desperately trying to project an aura of extreme wealth despite her father's massive public bankruptcy. She looked cheap and entirely out of place among the elegant black tie attire of my guests. Brenda, Trey, and Keisha trailed closely behind her, looking around the lavish, expensive ballroom with wide, greedy eyes. They had bypassed security, broken multiple laws, and stormed right into the most exclusive private event of the entire year. Jamal did not waste a single precious second trying to be discreet. He immediately spotted me standing up on the VIP balcony, looking down at him. His face twisted into an ugly, dark mask of pure, uncontrolled rage. He began marching straight down the center aisle, shoving past formally dressed waiters who were holding delicate silver trays of champagne. "Charmaine!" he screamed at the top of his lungs. His voice was completely hysterical, sharp, and violent, shattering the elegant, sophisticated atmosphere of the gala. "Stop hiding up there behind your massive security guards. We are not leaving this building until I get my money." The entire grand ballroom fell into a stunned, dead silence. The mayor paused with his crystal glass halfway to his mouth. Top-tier billionaire investors turned around in their velvet chairs, staring in absolute shock as this crazed, sweaty man stomped through their exclusive dinner party. Jamal marched until he reached the edge of the stage, pointing a shaking finger directly up at my balcony. "You are a massive fraud," he yelled, his voice cracking with raw desperation. "You lied to me in federal court. You deliberately hid a $250 million corporate asset during our legally binding divorce mediation. You stole from your own husband. You belong in prison." Vanessa quickly scurried up right behind him, trying her hardest to look intimidating and righteous. "That is right," she squawked loudly, her high-pitched voice grating against the quiet room. "You completely ruined our lives just because you were horribly jealous of our happiness. You are nothing but a bitter baby mama, maliciously keeping his children from him just to punish him." The sheer mind-boggling audacity of her words was actually breathtaking to witness. This was the exact same woman who had called me on a recorded line just months ago, literally offering me a pathetic $50,000 to permanently erase Jamal from the twins' birth certificates. And now she was standing in front of Atlanta's highest elite society, publicly calling me a bitter baby mama, keeping a loving father away from his kids. It was pathological lying at its absolute finest. Brenda, sensing a captive, wealthy audience, eagerly stepped forward and placed a highly theatrical hand over her chest, playing the role of the wounded matriarch. "She is a terrible woman who maliciously stole from her own flesh and blood," she announced loudly, addressing the confused tables of wealthy investors around her. "We took her in when she had absolutely nothing to her name. We gave her our family legacy, our support, and she completely betrayed my poor son." Keisha and Trey nodded along vigorously, looking incredibly smug and self-satisfied. They actually thought they were winning this confrontation. They honestly believed that by causing a massive, humiliating public scene, I would be so utterly terrified of the bad press and the social embarrassment that I would immediately write them a massive check just to make them go away quietly. They thought they were holding me financially hostage in front of my powerful new peers. Richard Vance. The lawyer aggressively waved a thick manila folder in the air, trying to look like a commanding legal authority. "My client has a legally binding claim to exactly 50% of the L'Oreal acquisition funds," Vance shouted, attempting to sound professional while standing next to a screaming family. "We have drafted a federal injunction. If you do not comply and surrender the funds, we will freeze your entire foundation immediately." Suddenly, 4 massive elite security guards dressed in sharp black suits rushed quickly down the main aisle. They aggressively grabbed Jamal, Trey, and Richard Vance by the shoulders, violently pinning their arms behind their backs, preparing to physically drag them and their entire toxic family out into the rainy street. Jamal struggled violently against their iron grip, screaming frantically about massive lawsuits and his imaginary stolen millions. Vanessa shrieked loudly, grabbing onto Jamal's suit jacket, trying to pull him free from the towering guards. The entire beautiful gala had devolved into absolute chaos, exactly as Jamal had viciously planned. "Wait!" I said loudly. My voice carried across the silent, cavernous ballroom, completely steady, totally calm, and full of absolute, undeniable authority. The elite security guards immediately froze in place, keeping their strong hands firmly gripped on Jamal's arms, but entirely stopping their forward momentum. I slowly, gracefully walked down the sweeping carpeted staircase from the VIP balcony. My deep sapphire blue silk gown trailed elegantly behind me. Every single eye in the massive room was locked intensely onto me. I walked straight up to the center of the main stage and calmly unhooked the heavy silver microphone from its tall stand. "Let him go," I instructed the head of security, my voice echoing clearly through the professional sound system. The guards immediately released Jamal, stepping back, but remaining perfectly poised to strike if he made a single wrong move. Jamal aggressively yanked his wrinkled suit jacket straight, panting heavily, and glaring up at me with pure venom. I slowly turned to face the massive crowd, offering a warm, perfectly composed, apologetic smile to the mayor, the investors, and my esteemed VIP guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, I deeply apologize for the sudden dramatic interruption to our beautiful evening," I said smoothly, projecting absolute confidence. "It seems my former husband has a few lingering grievances he would very much like to air publicly tonight. And since this entire foundation is strictly built on the core principles of complete transparency and absolute truth, I think it is only fair we let him speak his mind." A low murmur of intense curiosity rippled through the wealthy crowd. They were absolutely captivated by the unfolding drama. Nobody was pulling out their phones to record. They were too stunned watching the city's newest billionaire handle a violent public ambush with the regal composure of an absolute queen. I looked down directly at Jamal, who was staring up at me with a mixture of sudden confusion and greedy hope. He honestly thought my calm demeanor meant I was publicly surrendering to his aggressive extortion tactics. He thought his pathetic intimidation strategy had actually worked flawlessly. He wiped the nervous sweat from his forehead, assuming I was finally ready to negotiate a massive payout just to save my public reputation. I gestured gracefully toward the short set of carpeted stairs leading directly up to the brilliantly lit main stage. "Come on up, Jamal," I invited, my voice dripping with cold, terrifying politeness that sent a visible shiver down his spine. "Bring your lawyer. Bring your folder full of empty threats. Come up here onto this stage and tell the entire city of Atlanta exactly what you think you deserve." Jamal hesitated for only a fraction of a second. His massive ego and his desperate, blinding greed completely overpowered any remaining shred of common sense he possessed. He genuinely believed that because I was a woman standing in front of high society, I would eventually cave to his demands just to avoid a messy public scandal. He forcefully adjusted his suit jacket and marched directly up the carpeted stairs onto the brightly lit main stage. Richard Vance followed closely on his heels, aggressively clutching his leather briefcase. Vanessa scurried up the stairs right behind them, desperately trying to stand tall and project an image of extreme wealth and power. Brenda, Trey, and Keisha positioned themselves right at the base of the stage, crossing their arms and looking incredibly smug. They were entirely ready to watch Jamal publicly humiliate me and walk away with half of my fortune. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Charmaine?" Jamal sneered, stepping up to the microphone. "You think you can just hide a $250 million corporate acquisition from a federal judge? That is called fraud. You built that company while you were living in my house, eating my food, and spending my money. I am legally entitled to exactly $125 million, and I am not leaving this stage until you agree to transfer the funds." The silence in the grand ballroom was absolutely deafening. The most powerful people in Atlanta were watching a desperate broke man try to extort a billionaire on her own stage. I looked at him with a slow, terrifyingly calm smile. "Are you absolutely certain you want to have this conversation right here in front of all these people, Jamal? I am giving you one final chance to walk out of those doors with whatever tiny shred of dignity you have left." "I do not need your fake pity," Jamal shouted, his voice echoing loudly through the massive room. "I want my money. Tell them the truth, Charmaine. Tell all your fancy new friends how you maliciously stole from your own husband." I nodded slowly, stepping back from the microphone. "You want the truth, Jamal?" I asked, my voice perfectly steady. "Then let us give them the absolute truth." I raised my right hand and gestured toward the elite audiovisual team operating the control booth at the back of the ballroom. Instantly, the main ballroom lights dimmed, plunging the audience into a dramatic low light. Behind me, three massive high-definition LED projector screens seamlessly descended from the ceiling, spanning the entire width of the main stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced clearly, projecting my voice across the silent room. "My former husband claims I stole from him. He claims he was a supportive, loving partner who is legally entitled to half of my life's work. Let us take a look at exactly what kind of partner he was." The massive center screen flickered to life. The crystal-clear, high-definition hospital security footage began to play. The bright, sterile fluorescent lights of the recovery room sharply contrasted with the elegant, warm atmosphere of the gala. The footage had no sound, but the visual was absolutely devastating. There I was, lying in the hospital bed, looking incredibly pale and entirely exhausted. I was visibly hooked up to multiple intravenous lines and heart monitors, and resting directly on my chest, tightly wrapped in thin hospital blankets, were two tiny premature infants. A collective gasp echoed through the dark ballroom. The wealthy investors, the politicians, and the elite guests were instantly captivated by the raw, vulnerable scene playing out on the massive screen. Then the hospital door on the screen swung open. Jamal walked into the frame wearing his immaculate Tom Ford suit and his shiny gold Rolex. The audience watched in absolute horror as the silent Jamal on the screen refused to look at his newborn children. They watched as he impatiently checked his watch. And then they watched the exact moment he callously tossed the thick manila envelope of divorce papers directly onto the lap of a bleeding, recovering woman holding his premature twins. Loud murmurs of intense disgust and absolute outrage rippled through the elegant crowd. I saw the mayor shake his head in sheer disbelief. Wealthy venture capitalists who had just been clapping for my foundation were now glaring up at Jamal with expressions of pure, unfiltered hatred. Jamal stood frozen on the stage, his face completely drained of all color. He stared at the massive screen, his jaw hanging open. He had never considered that the hospital had cameras. He had never considered that his darkest, most cruel moment had been perfectly captured and permanently archived. "That is completely out of context," Jamal stammered frantically, stepping toward the microphone. His voice was shaking violently. "She is manipulating the footage. I was just giving her the legal paperwork she asked for." "Context," I repeated smoothly, my voice cutting through his pathetic lies like a freshly sharpened knife. "You want more context. Let us add some audio." I signaled the tech booth again. The massive screen transitioned from the hospital footage to a simple black background displaying a single glowing audio waveform. The crisp, high-quality recording of Vanessa's phone call blasted through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers. The rhythmic crashing of ocean waves and the soft clinking of crystal champagne glasses filled the ballroom. And then Vanessa's toxic, condescending voice echoed across the room for every single powerful person in Atlanta to hear. "My family trust is willing to give you a one-time tax-free payment of $50,000. Vanessa physically flinched on stage, her eyes widening in absolute sheer terror as she heard her own voice playing back to her. She tried to step backward, attempting to hide behind Jamal's broad shoulders, but there was nowhere to run. The recording continued, projecting her vile cruelty to the entire city. Having two fatherless kids from a failed starter marriage floating around in the background will just ruin Jamal's aesthetic. He cannot be seen as a deadbeat baby daddy. The wealthy crowd erupted into loud, aggressive jeers and furious whispers. The elite women of Atlanta high society stared up at Vanessa with looks of pure, venomous disgust. Vanessa had spent her entire adult life desperately trying to claw her way into this exact social circle, and in less than 60 seconds, I had completely, permanently destroyed her entire reputation. She was officially a social pariah, an outcast who would never be invited to another charity event, dinner party, or country club gathering in this city ever again. Down at the base of the stage, Brenda, Trey, and Keisha were desperately trying to melt into the shadows. Brenda's face was flushed dark red with absolute overwhelming shame. She tried to hide her face behind her designer handbag, but the people standing near her were physically backing away, treating her family like they carried a highly contagious disease. "This is highly illegal," Richard Vance suddenly shouted, stepping forward and aggressively waving his arms. He was sweating profusely, realizing that his own professional reputation was rapidly going down in flames alongside his client. You cannot play unconsented recordings. This is a massive distraction from the fact that you committed federal financial fraud. My client is entitled to that company because it was built during the marriage. I turned my absolute focus onto the sweating lawyer. I smiled a cold, predatory smile that made Vance physically swallow hard. A massive distraction, Richard asked politely. Let us talk about the law then. Since you are so incredibly passionate about legal documentation, let us project the exact separation agreement you drafted with your own two hands. I clicked a small remote in my hand. The massive LED screen shifted instantly, displaying a high-resolution scanned copy of the final divorce decree. The bright white document was magnified so massively that every single person in the back row of the ballroom could read the fine print perfectly. I highlighted a specific paragraph in bright yellow. Right there, I announced, pointing at the screen. Paragraph 4, Section B, drafted by the esteemed Richard Vance and aggressively demanded by Jamal himself. The husband completely and permanently waives all rights, claims, ownership, and interests in the wife's business venture known as Melanin Tech. The husband shall bear zero responsibility for any debts, liabilities, or financial obligations associated with said business. I slowly turned back to look directly at Jamal, who was physically trembling with absolute terror. You were so incredibly terrified that my kitchen chemistry project was going to fail and leave you with massive debts that you literally forced the judge to sever you from my assets. I explained, my voice echoing with pure triumphant victory. You did not want to pay for my servers. You did not want to fund my delusions. You legally, completely, and voluntarily abandoned the company. The L'Oreal acquisition happened exactly 5 days after the judge stamped that final decree. I did not hide a single asset from you, Jamal. You just threw away $250 million because you were too busy running away with a woman whose family is completely bankrupt. The crowd gasped loudly again, completely shocked by the brutal, brilliant legality of my strategy. I had not broken a single law. I had simply let Jamal's massive, arrogant ego destroy his own life. Richard Vance stared at the massive screen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He realized instantly that he had absolutely no legal case. He had drafted the very document that locked his client out of a billion-dollar empire. His career as a high-priced wealth protection attorney was officially completely over. Jamal completely snapped. The absolute reality of his devastating failure finally crashed down on his fragile mind. He lunged toward the microphone, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure feral hatred. "You think you won?" he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "You think you can just embarrass us like this and walk away?" Vanessa's father is a massive commercial real estate tycoon. He is going to hire the most vicious legal team in the entire country. We are going to sue you for defamation. We are going to sue you for emotional distress. We will tie up your new foundation in federal litigation for the next 10 years until you are completely bleeding cash. We will bury you, Charmaine. Vanessa nodded frantically beside him, clinging to the absolute last desperate shred of her fake wealthy identity. "My daddy will destroy you," she shrieked hysterically. "He owns half the buildings in this city." I stood perfectly still, letting their pathetic, desperate threats wash over me. The entire ballroom was silent, waiting to see how I would respond to this massive legal threat. I slowly raised the microphone back to my lips. A slow, genuine, chilling smile spread across my face. "Speaking of Vanessa's family," I said, my voice dropping into a smooth, dangerous octave that sent a visible shockwave through the room. I turned my attention to the front row of the VIP tables designated for the most powerful institutional investors in the country. I looked directly at a tall, distinguished older black gentleman wearing an immaculate tailored tuxedo. "Marcus," I called out casually, addressing him by his first name. "Would you mind stepping up here for a brief moment?" Marcus, the brilliant, ruthless chief executive officer of Vanguard Black, the largest private equity and debt restructuring firm in the southern United States, calmly placed his linen napkin on the velvet table. He stood up, adjusting his expensive silk tie, and began walking slowly, purposefully up the carpeted stairs toward the main stage. Jamal and Vanessa stared at the incredibly powerful man, completely confused. They had absolutely no idea who he was or why I was calling him to the stage. But the wealthy investors in the audience knew exactly who Marcus was, and a sudden electric current of sheer anticipation ripped through the entire grand ballroom. The absolute ultimate kill shot was finally here. Marcus reached the top of the stairs and walked over to stand directly beside me. He was a man who commanded absolute respect without ever having to raise his voice or demand attention. He looked at Jamal and Vanessa with the mild, detached curiosity of a scientist, observing a particularly pathetic species of insect. The sheer gravitational pull of his presence made Jamal physically shrink backward, taking a small defensive step away from the microphone. "Thank you for joining me, Marcus," I said, handing him a secondary microphone I had waiting on the podium. "Would you mind explaining to my former husband and his lovely new bride exactly what Vanguard Black has been doing on my behalf for the past 3 months?" Marcus offered a crisp, professional nod. With pleasure, Charmaine, he rumbled his deep baritone voice, carrying effortlessly across the silent, breathless ballroom. When Charmaine approached my firm after her highly successful corporate acquisition, she had a very specific investment strategy in mind. While most newly minted billionaires immediately diversify their portfolios into safe traditional index funds or flashy tech startups, Charmaine directed my executive team to aggressively pursue distressed debt. Specifically, she instructed us to quietly purchase the heavily leveraged, toxic commercial real estate loans belonging to a certain holding company here in Atlanta. Vanessa swallowed hard, her throat visibly bobbing under the bright stage lights. "What holding company?" she asked, her voice trembling so violently it was barely a whisper. Marcus adjusted his expensive silver cufflinks, looking down at her over his nose. "Your father's holding company, Vanessa," he stated flatly. "The one that currently holds over $80 million in defaulted high-interest loans. His primary lenders were absolutely panicking because his commercial properties have been bleeding massive amounts of revenue for over 2 years now. The major banks were desperate to offload the bad debt before the inevitable highly publicized public bankruptcy filing hits the news cycle next week." I stepped forward, taking over the narrative. I took a slow, deliberate step closer to Jamal, whose eyes were darting wildly around the massive room, desperately searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. "I did not just sit on my $250 million. Jamal," I explained, my voice perfectly steady and dripping with lethal surgical precision. "I put it to work immediately. I used Vanguard Black as a proxy firm to buy up every single piece of defaulted debt belonging to Vanessa's father's entire real estate empire. I bought all of it for pennies on the dollar." The absolute devastating reality of my words hit Jamal like a physical blow to the chest. He staggered backward, bumping hard into his lawyer, Richard Vance, who was already looking frantically at the heavy mahogany exit doors, realizing he had hitched his entire career to a sinking ship. "You married Vanessa for generational wealth, Jamal?" I asked, tilting my head slightly and offering a smile completely devoid of warmth. "Well, her generation is entirely bankrupt. There is no hidden family trust fund. There is no massive inheritance waiting to fund your luxurious retirement. Her father is completely insolvent, and my firm is now your largest creditor. I own the debt on his shiny office buildings. I own the debt on his failing shopping centers. I own the debt on every single asset he ever used to project his fake billionaire lifestyle to the world." Vanessa let out a loud, horrific wail that pierced the quiet room. "No!" she screamed, covering her ears with both of her hands. "No, my daddy is rich. We are rich. You are lying. You are a dirty, bitter liar." I reached into my designer evening clutch and pulled out a crisp, heavy piece of official legal parchment. I did not bother to unfold it. I simply held it up between two fingers, letting the bright golden stage lights catch the official state seal stamped firmly at the bottom of the page. "I am not lying, Vanessa," I said coldly, my voice echoing through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers. "In fact, let us talk about your immediate living situation right now. That beautiful, sprawling mansion in Tuxedo Park that Jamal bought just to impress your bankrupt family. The one he foolishly took out a massive high-interest mortgage for under his own name. The one the bank officially foreclosed on yesterday afternoon because neither of you had a single dime left to make the monthly payments. Jamal's breathing became incredibly ragged. He looked at the piece of paper in my hand with pure, unadulterated terror. He looked like a man who was watching his own execution in real time. "How do you know about that?" he choked out heavily. "Because the bank put it up for private auction this morning." I smiled, my eyes locking intensely onto his shattered expression. "And I bought it in cash. Every single square foot of that marble floor you dropped your whiskey glass on. Every single blade of grass in the manicured front yard. It legally belongs to me now. You are standing in front of your landlord." The entire grand ballroom absolutely erupted. The sheer absolute savagery of the reveal was simply too much for the elite crowd to contain. Top-tier billionaire investors let out loud shouts of disbelief and roaring enthusiastic laughter. The mayor was actually clapping his hands together, shaking his head at the brilliant, utterly ruthless financial checkmate I had just executed on live stage. I had not just defeated them in a petty screaming match. I had completely permanently dismantled their entire existence using the exact same capitalist system they worshipped and used to abuse me. Jamal stood frozen on the stage, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream of absolute total defeat. He had voluntarily thrown away $250 million and eagerly married into a mountain of highly toxic debt. He was entirely homeless, completely jobless, and publicly exposed as a cruel, unfaithful fool in front of every single powerful person in the city of Atlanta. Vanessa turned slowly to look at the man she had viciously stolen from me, the man who was supposed to be her golden ticket to endless luxury, the man who had promised her a lifetime of elite country clubs and private jet vacations. He was currently sweating profusely, trembling violently in a wrinkled custom suit, and staring blankly at the carpeted floor. "You useless, absolute idiot!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice breaking into a hysterical, ear-piercing screech. "You told me you were a genius wealth manager. You told me you had millions hidden away in offshore accounts. You let her take everything from us." Before Jamal could even open his mouth to defend his massive failures, Vanessa raised her hand and slapped him directly across the face with all of her might. The sharp, violent crack of her palm striking against his cheek echoed incredibly loudly through the microphone, picking up the physical assault for the entire ballroom to hear. Jamal stumbled backward, holding his rapidly reddening face, completely stunned by the sudden violence. "You completely ruined my life!" Vanessa screamed, lunging aggressively at him again. Her long acrylic nails scratched wildly at his suit jacket, tearing at the expensive fabric. "You broke, pathetic loser. You have absolutely nothing." Security guards immediately rushed the stage, grabbing Vanessa's flailing arms and pulling her violently away from Jamal. She kicked and screamed like a feral animal, her expensive designer high heels flying off her feet as the massive guards dragged her backward down the stairs toward the ballroom exit. She looked entirely deranged, a complete public spectacle, exposing her true trashy nature in front of the very high society she had spent her entire superficial life worshipping. Jamal did not even try to stop them from taking his wife away. He just stood there holding his stinging face completely utterly destroyed. Down on the floor, his mother Brenda was openly weeping at the base of the stairs, hiding her face deep in her white Chanel handbag. The wealthy, prominent women standing near her were whispering cruel, harsh judgments, taking clear mental notes to ensure Brenda was permanently blacklisted from every single church, committee, charity board, and social club in the entire state of Georgia. Her fake righteous reputation was completely obliterated, but the absolute most pathetic display of the entire night came directly from Trey and Keisha. The exact second they watched Vanessa get physically dragged out of the grand room, screaming hysterically, and saw Jamal standing completely broken and penniless on the stage, their survival instincts aggressively kicked in. They realized with absolute horrifying clarity that they had backed the entirely wrong horse. They had spent months viciously mocking me, insulting my appearance, and laughing at my immense pain. And now I was a literal billionaire who currently held the financial fate of their entire extended family directly in the palm of my hand. Trey practically shoved his own crying mother out of the way to rush up the first few carpeted steps of the stage. Keisha was right behind him, her previous arrogant, smug smirk completely replaced by a look of sheer, desperate, groveling panic. Charmaine, Trey yelled, waving his hands frantically above his head to get my attention. "Charmaine, please wait a second. Please, you have to listen to us. We had absolutely no idea Jamal was doing this to you. We swear on our lives we did not know he was stealing the money. Keisha nodded vigorously, tears of pure, terrified panic welling up in her eyes and ruining her heavy makeup. It was all Vanessa. Charmaine. Keisha cried loudly, her voice trembling with fake emotion. Vanessa manipulated all of us into turning against you. She told us horrible, disgusting lies about your business. We always loved you, Charmaine. You know we always thought of you as a real sister. I looked down at them from the top of the stage, feeling absolutely nothing but pure, icy revulsion. These were the exact same two people who had stood in my grand foyer drinking my sparkling water and forcing me to pack my entire life into cheap black plastic garbage bags. These were the exact same people who had gleefully hand-delivered a massive gold foil wedding invitation to my cramped dark apartment just to loudly laugh at my misery. I raised my hand, firmly silencing their pathetic, desperate, groveling apologies instantly. "Do not ever call me your sister Keisha," I commanded, my voice slicing through the tense air like a sharpened, heavy blade. "You both showed me exactly who you truly were when I was at my absolute lowest vulnerable point. You actively laughed at my physical pain. You gleefully celebrated my financial destruction. You are nothing but pathetic parasites who attach yourselves to whoever you think has the most money in the room. Well, the money has officially moved and the door to my life is permanently bolted shut." I looked over at the massive head of my elite private security team, giving him a sharp, definitive nod. "Get them all out of my sight," I ordered coldly. The massive security guards immediately moved forward, their faces completely blank and strictly professional. They grabbed Trey by the collar of his suit and seized Keisha by her arm, pulling her away from the stage. But before the guards could reach the bottom of the stairs, Brenda suddenly threw herself entirely onto the floor. She collapsed directly onto her knees, right at the edge of the stage, grasping desperately at the hem of my sapphire blue silk gown. Her expensive white Chanel handbag tumbled away, spilling her lipstick and church bulletins across the carpet. "Charmaine, please!" she sobbed hysterically, her voice echoing loudly in the massive ballroom. "Please, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, you have to find it in your heart to forgive us. We are your family. We are the grandmother and the uncle to your beautiful babies. You cannot just throw us out onto the street. The Bible says we must forgive 70 times 7. Please, Charmaine, have mercy on us. Do not take my son's house. Do not leave us with nothing. Remember, family is forever." I looked down at the woman who had tormented me for years. This was the same woman who had stood in my hospital room looking at my premature babies with absolute disgust, calling me a charity case. She was using her religion as a desperate shield only when it benefited her. I gently but firmly pulled the fabric of my dress out of her frantic, grasping hands. I stepped back, looking down at her kneeling form with absolute cold detachment. "You do not get to weaponize the word family against me, Brenda," I said, my voice perfectly clear and carrying a terrifying, absolute finality. "A real family protects each other. A real family supports each other in the darkest, most terrifying moments of life. You did not see me as family when I was bleeding on a hospital bed. You saw me as an infection you desperately wanted to cut out of your prestigious bloodline." Brenda wept louder, burying her face in her hands. I leaned forward slightly, making sure every single word resonated through the microphone. "My family consists of me and my twins," I declared proudly. "You all are just tenants facing eviction, and your lease is officially up." I gave a sharp nod to the head of security. The massive guards instantly swooped in. They grabbed Brenda by her arms, lifting her entirely off the floor. She kicked and wailed, her expensive church hat falling off her head and getting trampled under the heavy boots of the guards. Trey and Keisha were already being forcefully shoved through the heavy mahogany doors, screaming obscenities and blaming each other for the massive, catastrophic failure of their extortion plan. Jamal was the last to be removed. Two guards grabbed him by his shoulders, turning him around to face the exit. But right before they pushed him through the doors, Jamal threw his head back and looked at me one final time. His eyes were completely hollow, entirely stripped of the massive, arrogant ego that had defined his entire existence. He looked at the beautiful, powerful billionaire standing on the stage and realized with absolute soul-crushing certainty that he had thrown away the greatest thing that had ever happened to him. The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut behind him, cutting off the chaotic screams of his toxic family. The grand ballroom fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The heavy, dramatic tension slowly began to dissipate, replaced by an incredible electric energy. I stood alone on the main stage, taking a deep, steadying breath. I had faced my absolute worst nightmare, and I had emerged completely victorious. Marcus, the brilliant CEO of Vanguard. Black stepped forward and offered me a warm, respectful smile. He reached out and handed me a crystal flute filled with vintage champagne. I took the delicate glass, my hand perfectly steady. I turned back to face the crowd of incredibly powerful investors, politicians, and elite guests. I raised the crystal flute high into the air, the golden liquid catching the bright light of the chandeliers. To new beginnings, I announced, my voice ringing with pure, unadulterated joy. And to building your own tables. The entire ballroom erupted. Hundreds of wealthy, powerful people simultaneously rose to their feet, delivering a massive, deafening standing ovation. The mayor raised his glass, cheering loudly. The investors clapped enthusiastically, celebrating not just my philanthropic foundation, but the absolute masterpiece of justice they had just witnessed. The classical string quartet immediately resumed playing, an upbeat, triumphant melody filling the massive room with beautiful music. I took a sip of the sweet champagne, letting the incredible warmth of the moment wash over me completely. Later that night, after the gala had ended and millions of dollars had been successfully raised for my foundation, I returned to my beautiful, sprawling estate. I walked softly into the massive custom nursery, listening to the gentle, rhythmic breathing of my sleeping twins. I stood over their cribs, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. For years, I had desperately tried to mold myself into a shape that would fit into Jamal's toxic family. I had tolerated their cruel insults, swallowed my pride, and worked myself to the bone just to earn a tiny scrap of their conditional approval. I thought that if I was just successful enough, quiet enough, and accommodating enough, they would eventually welcome me to their prestigious table. But hitting absolute rock bottom taught me the greatest lesson of my entire life. You should never have to beg for a seat at a table where you are not respected. When toxic people try to push you out into the cold, you do not stand at their window crying to be let back in. You walk away, you harness your pain, and you build your own massive table. You build a table so incredibly large and so undeniably powerful that the very people who starved you end up begging for your crumbs. The betrayal, the financial abuse, and the sheer cruelty of Jamal and his family were meant to destroy me. Instead, they were the exact catalyst that forged me into a titan. I lost a cheating husband and a toxic family, but I gained the entire world. I found my true voice, I secured absolute generational wealth for my children, and I reclaimed my inherent worth. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you believe the best revenge is massive success. The most profound lesson from this story is that your inherent worth is never defined by the cruelty or abandonment of others, even those who are supposed to be your family. When you are pushed to absolute rock bottom, do not waste your energy begging for validation or a seat at a toxic table. Instead, use their betrayal as the ultimate fuel to forge your own path. True justice and the sweetest revenge do not come from petty arguments, but from achieving massive, undeniable success. Build your own empire, protect your peace, and invite only those who truly respect you. If you have ever had to bravely cut off toxic family members to protect your peace and build your own table, share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring journeys of resilience.